What happens when a beloved country music superstar walks into what should be a routine interview, only to discover the host has an agenda that goes far beyond promoting his latest album? In just 25 seconds, one loaded question would expose the true character of a daytime television host and transform a friendly chat into a career-defining moment that would leave viewers speechless. Blake Shelton had appeared on countless talk shows throughout his career. The routine was always the same: smile for the cameras, talk about new music, share a funny story or two, and plug whatever project brought him to the studio that day. But when he settled into the plush chair across from Tamron Hall on that particular afternoon, he had no idea he was walking into an ambush. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement as the cameras rolled. Tamron Hall, known for her polished demeanor and supposedly warm interviewing style, flashed her trademark smile as she welcomed the country music icon to her show. Everything seemed perfectly normal as the show's opening music faded and the red recording light indicated they were live. "Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm here with Grammy-nominated country superstar Blake Shelton," Tamron announced to her audience, her voice carrying that practiced television sweetness that daytime hosts perfect over years of broadcasting. "Blake, thank you so much for being here with us today." Blake leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. He had done this dance 1,000 times before. "Thanks for having me, Tamron. Always a pleasure to be here. Now, you've got a new album coming out, and I know our viewers are excited to hear about it," she continued, maintaining her professional composure. "But before we get to that, I think we need to address something that's been making headlines recently." Something in her tone shifted. It was subtle, but Blake caught it immediately. The warmth seemed to drain from her voice, replaced by something sharper, more calculated. His media-trained instincts kicked in, and he straightened slightly in his chair. "Oh, what's that about?" he asked, keeping his own tone light and conversational, though internally he was already preparing for whatever curveball was coming his way. Tamron's smile remained plastered on her face, but her eyes had hardened. "Well, there have been some comments you made in a recent interview that have rubbed some people the wrong way. Comments about your fellow coaches on The Voice and how you feel about the direction the show has taken." Blake's brow furrowed. He genuinely had no idea what she was referring to. In all his recent interviews, he had been nothing but complimentary about his fellow coaches and the show that had given him such a significant platform beyond his music career. "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure what comments you're talking about," he replied honestly. "I've always had great things to say about everyone I work with on The Voice. Could you be more specific about what you're referring to?" The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the room. Tamron leaned forward in her chair, and when she spoke again, there was no mistaking the accusatory tone in her voice. "Don't you think it's a bit disingenuous to sit here and pretend you don't know what I'm talking about? You made some pretty harsh comments about how certain coaches don't deserve their spots on the show, and how the producers are more interested in creating drama than finding real talent." Blake's confusion was genuine and visible. He shook his head slowly, his voice remaining calm despite the increasingly hostile atmosphere. "Tamron, I honestly have no idea what you're talking about. I've never made comments like that about anyone. I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding here." But Tamron wasn't backing down. In fact, she seemed to be doubling down on whatever narrative she had decided to push. "So you're saying you never criticized the show's casting choices? You never suggested that some of your fellow coaches were hired more for their celebrity status than their actual musical expertise?" The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Blake could feel the weight of the cameras on him, could sense the studio audience holding their collective breath as they waited for his response. This was clearly a setup, and he was beginning to understand that no matter how he responded, Tamron Hall had already decided what story she wanted to tell. Blake took a deep breath, his years of experience in the spotlight serving him well as he maintained his composure despite the increasingly hostile environment. He looked directly into Tamron's eyes, his voice steady and measured. "I need to stop you right there, Tamron. I have never, and I mean never, made any comments like what you're describing. I don't know where this information is coming from, but it's completely false." His tone was firm but respectful, showing the kind of grace under pressure that had made him a fan favorite for years. Tamron, however, seemed undeterred by his denial. If anything, she appeared more determined to push her narrative. "Blake, we have sources that say otherwise. Multiple people have come forward with these claims." "Then I'd like to know who these sources are," Blake replied, his patience beginning to wear thin. "Because whoever told you I said those things is either lying or severely mistaken. I've spent over a decade on that show, and I've never spoken negatively about any of my colleagues, past or present." The tension in the studio was palpable. Even the production crew seemed uncomfortable with the direction the interview had taken. But Tamron pressed on, seemingly oblivious to or unconcerned with the fact that her guest was being completely transparent and honest. Well, sources often prefer to remain anonymous when dealing with sensitive workplace situations, she said, her tone becoming more condescending with each word. Surely you can understand why people might be hesitant to go on the record when speaking about someone in your position. Blake's jaw tightened slightly. He was beginning to see exactly what kind of interview this really was. My position? What exactly do you mean by that? You're one of the most powerful people on that show, Blake. You've been there the longest. You have the most influence. When you speak, people listen. And when you criticize your colleagues, even if you think it's behind closed doors, word gets out. But that's exactly my point, Blake said, his voice rising slightly for the first time since the ambush began. I haven't criticized anyone. These alleged comments you're talking about simply don't exist. You're asking me to defend myself against accusations that have no basis in reality. Tamron leaned back in her chair, a slight smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. It was as if she was enjoying watching him squirm, even though anyone with eyes could see that Blake was being completely genuine in his confusion and denial. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, Blake. Sometimes we say things we later regret, and the mature thing to do is own up to them rather than deny they ever happened. That was the moment Blake realized he was dealing with someone who had already made up her mind about the story she wanted to tell, regardless of what actually happened. He could see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice. This wasn't journalism. This wasn't even entertainment. This was character assassination disguised as an interview. Tamron, I'm going to say this one more time, and I hope you're really listening, he said, his voice taking on a steel edge that his fans rarely heard but that commanded absolute attention. I have never made the comments you're describing. Not privately, not publicly, not ever. And frankly, I'm starting to wonder if this whole thing is something you've made up to create drama for your show. The studio fell completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to stop their subtle movements as everyone processed what Blake had just said. He had essentially accused the host of fabricating the entire controversy, and the boldness of his statement hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Tamron's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Her smile disappeared entirely, replaced by a look of barely controlled anger. Excuse me? Are you suggesting that I would make up stories about my guests? I'm not suggesting anything, Blake replied evenly. I'm stating a fact. You've spent the last several minutes accusing me of saying things I never said, based on sources you won't name, about comments that don't exist. So either someone is feeding you false information, or you're creating this controversy yourself. The audience was completely captivated now, watching what was quickly becoming the most dramatic daytime television moment in recent memory. This wasn't the usual scripted banter or manufactured conflict that often characterized talk show appearances. This was real, raw, and completely unfiltered. Tamron stood up abruptly, her professional mask slipping further with each passing second. I think we need to take a commercial break. But Blake wasn't having it. He remained seated, his posture relaxed, but his eyes focused intently on his host. Actually, I think we should finish this conversation right here, right now. Your audience deserves to know the truth about what's really happening here. The moment Blake refused to let Tamron escape to a commercial break, something fundamental shifted in the studio atmosphere. The host's carefully crafted persona was crumbling in real time, and everyone present could feel the authentic drama unfolding before their eyes. The truth? Tamron's voice was no longer the polished professional tone her viewers were accustomed to. There was a sharp edge to it now, a hint of desperation that suggested she was realizing her ambush wasn't going according to plan. The truth is that you're sitting here denying things that multiple people have confirmed. Blake leaned forward slightly, his calm demeanor making Tamron's increasing agitation even more apparent by contrast. Then let's talk about these multiple people. Name one. Give me one name, one specific quote, one piece of actual evidence to back up what you're saying. I've already explained that sources often prefer to remain anonymous. That's convenient, Blake replied, and there was no mistaking the skepticism in his voice now. So you want me and your audience to just take your word that these anonymous sources exist and that they've accurately reported things I supposedly said? Tamron's hands were visibly shaking now, though she tried to hide it by gripping the arms of her chair. I don't appreciate your tone, Blake. You're being defensive and hostile. I'm being honest, he corrected her. There's a difference. When someone accuses you of something you didn't do, based on evidence they can't or won't produce, the reasonable response is to ask questions. That's what I'm doing. The studio audience was completely transfixed. Many of them had their phones out, undoubtedly recording what was becoming an absolutely legendary television moment. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong. This was a masterclass in how to handle false accusations with dignity and strength. "You know what I think is really happening here?" Blake continued, his voice steady and clear. "I think you brought me on this show today with a predetermined story in mind. I think you decided before I even walked through that door that you were going to create some kind of controversy, regardless of whether it was based in reality or not." Tamron's face was flushed now, and she looked around the studio as if searching for someone to help her regain control of the situation, but her production team seemed just as captivated by the unfolding drama as everyone else. "That's absolutely ridiculous," she stammered, but her protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "Is it?" Blake asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to get me to admit to saying things I never said, based on sources you won't identify, about situations that never happened. What else am I supposed to think?" The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. What started as Tamron's attempted takedown of her guest had transformed into Blake, exposing her questionable journalistic practices in front of a live studio audience and television cameras. "I think," Blake said, rising from his chair with the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of commanding stages and studios, "that your audience deserves better than this kind of manufactured drama. They deserve hosts who are more interested in having real conversations than in creating fake controversies." Tamron finally exploded. "You can't talk to me like that. This is my show." "And that's exactly the problem," Blake replied, his voice remaining calm, even as Tamron's composure completely disintegrated. "You think owning a show gives you the right to ambush your guests with false accusations and made-up stories? It doesn't." The studio erupted in murmurs and whispers as the audience processed what they were witnessing. This was no longer a talk show interview. This had become a real-time demonstration of integrity under pressure. And Blake Shelton was passing the test with flying colors, while his host was failing spectacularly. "Get him out of here!" Tamron shouted to her production team, pointing at Blake as if he were some kind of threat rather than a guest who had simply refused to play along with her manufactured drama. Blake looked around the studio, making eye contact with as many audience members as possible. "Folks, I came here today to talk about music and to connect with you all. Instead, I've been subjected to a series of false accusations based on anonymous sources and non-existent evidence. I hope you'll remember this moment the next time you're watching daytime television and wondering whether what you're seeing is real or just manufactured for ratings." As security hesitantly approached, clearly uncomfortable with the situation they were being asked to handle, Blake gathered his composure one final time. "I'll leave voluntarily because I have too much respect for these audience members to turn this into more of a circus than it already has become. But I want everyone here to remember what really happened today." He walked toward the exit with his head held high, leaving behind a host whose credibility lay in tatters and an audience that had just witnessed one of the most authentic moments in daytime television history.